Israel grants permission to U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib to visit her family in the West Bank. This a day after she and Ilhan Omar were barred from entering the country. An Iranian oil tanker seized last month can leave Gibraltar as soon as today, but Gibraltar's chief minister says the courts will weigh any U.S. attempts to block the Grey Swan from leaving. And Hong Kong on the brink of its first recession in over a decade. The Asian financial hub reeling after 2 months of protests. The chief executive of a flag carrier Cathay Pacific has resigned after pressure from Beijing. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. First, Israel says it will allow U.S. Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib to visit her family in the West Bank. She, along with Ilhan Omar, were barred from entering the country on the grounds of their support for a movement which advocates boycotts and sanctions of Israeli businesses. The decision to block the only 2 Muslim women in Congress came after the U.S. President Donald Trump tweeted that the pair hated all Jewish people and were a disgrace. Earlier, I spoke to our correspondent Iris Mackler in Jerusalem for the latest.
Israel says that it had earlier indicated that if the motives of the trip were not political, then it would consider what it calls these humanitarian grounds. And as soon as Rashida Tlaib, who's a Palestinian American, she still has relatives living in the West Bank. As soon as she heard that, she reapplied and she said, basically, I want to come for humanitarian reasons. I want to see my grandmother. She's 90 years old. I may not have another chance to see her. And on that basis, can I come? I won't be taking part in political actions. So the Interior Minister, who was one of the driving forces behind keeping her out, said that he hopes that is actually what she will do, not just what she says she will do. And on that basis, he's allowed her in.
Okay, so she's been allowed in. And, you know, yesterday, Iris, when we had the decision come from the Israelis, we had a slew of criticism from the Democrats. The Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, in fact, said the snub was beneath the dignity of the great state of Israel. Have we seen similar criticism from where you are?
Yes, there's been a lot of criticism inside Israel from opposition groups. Firstly, for whether it was or was not a reaction to Donald Trump, it looks like Israel was pressured by Donald Trump and gave in to that pressure. And what leaders are saying here is that Israel has worked very hard over years to be a consensus issue inside American politics, to be by bipartisan support, and that this endangers that. One American Jewish writer actually wrote the words, I'm going to quote, "Trump and Netanyahu just broke the special relationship between America and Israel." So there's that kind of criticism coming from inside Israel too. There's also the criticism from opposition leaders who say a month ago Benjamin Netanyahu indicated that he would allow these women to enter. Something changed, and they fear that what changed was him actually looking at wanting to burnish his right-wing credentials ahead of elections here. So they criticise him for that, and as well, of course, they say it's anti-democratic, as well as being anti the Democratic Party, the Democrat Party in the United States.
Iris Mackler reporting there earlier from Jerusalem. Now, an Iranian oil tanker seized by the British Royal Navy last month could leave Gibraltar as soon as today. The Grey Swan was intercepted after it was suspected of violating EU sanctions by transporting oil to Syria. Gibraltar's chief minister says the tanker can leave as soon as it's ready, but the courts will weigh any US attempts to block it from leaving. Ships have been used as a pawn since tensions between the United States and Iran started to rise. Yuka Roya reports.
May the 12th, 4 ships, including 2 Saudi oil tankers, suffer explosions while at anchor in the Gulf of Oman. The US accused Iran of planting mines on the vessels, a charge Tehran denied. The incident set off a crisis, coming at a time of already heightened tensions between the US and Iran over the latter's nuclear program. A month later, similar attacks damaged 2 oil tankers, one Norwegian and the other Japanese, just off the Strait of Hormuz. The US again blamed Iran, and Tehran accused Washington of warmongering. On the 20th of June, Iran's Revolutionary Guard shot down an American drone, saying it was flying over Iranian territory. Denying the claim, the US president ordered airstrikes on Iran, only to call it off at the last minute.
But I didn't like the idea of them knowingly shooting down an unmanned drone, and then we kill 150 people. I didn't like that.
In July, the UK was dragged into the fray. The Royal Navy seized the Grace 1 off the coast of Gibraltar on suspicion the Iranian tanker was violating EU sanctions by taking oil to Syria. Tehran issued a stern warning to Britain.
You are the initiator of insecurity, and you will realize the consequences later.
The next day, the Royal Navy said its frigate drove away Iranian boats trying to impede an oil tanker owned by BP near the Gulf. The incident prompted the UK to send a second warship to the area.
Obviously very concerning developments, but also I'm very proud of the Royal Navy and the role that they played in keeping British assets, British shipping safe.
Meanwhile, Washington claimed the US warship destroyed an Iranian drone on the Strait of Hormuz. Then, on the 19th of July, Iran's Revolutionary Guard forces boarded another British-flagged tanker, Stena Impero. It and the Grace 1 became pawns in the standoff. Although Britain and Iran have both denied that they would swap the tankers for each other, there are expectations that the Stena Impero may be released after the Grace 1 is freed.
To Hong Kong next, where protests continue to grip the city after flights were cancelled earlier this week. Protesters initially took to the streets to oppose an extradition bill with mainland China. While that piece of legislation has been shelved, there have been fears that Beijing could swoop in with force to quell the unrest. Now, economic data released today shows Hong Kong is on the brink of its first recession over a decade. And earlier, the chief executive of flag carrier Cathay Pacific resigned after growing pressure from Beijing. For more, we can go across to our correspondent Charles Pellegrin over in Hong Kong. Charles, a rally is taking place where you are. Protesters calling for international pressure to mount. Do they feel the international community has abandoned them?
Well, that's exactly why they're holding this rally. I don't think they don't feel like there's been enough support for Hong Kong, especially from countries that share its values, democratic countries especially. So they're gathered, about 100 people are gathered right behind me in Chatter Garden to call on the international community to put pressure on China. First off, on the United Kingdom, the former colonial power, to ask for it to say that the terms of the 1984 joint declaration signed with China have been breached. That was a declaration that grants Hong Kong the high degree of autonomy that it's supposed to have until 2047. Beijing, in response, says that these terms are no longer valid since the handover in 1997. Actually, this has been contradicted by the former Secretary of Foreign Affairs of Britain, Jeremy Hunt, and he was called out for having colonial illusions by Beijing. Another one of these things that they're asking in this protest is for U.S. Financial sanctions to be applied to individuals who have suppressed or are complicit in suppressing civil liberties here in Hong Kong.
Now, Charles, some protesters have been apologizing for going too far in recent days. Are they going to maybe rethink their strategy going forward?
Well, there's definitely a debate going on ever since the events that took place this week at the airport, where two mainlanders were mobbed and attacked on suspicion that at least one of them was a police officer disguised as a protester. Well, after those events and those violent images that were showed around the world, there was definitely a debate between the more peaceful approach, those who want a peaceful approach to getting their demands heard, which has been basically the road that they've been going down for over 2 to 3 months, and the more frustrated side of the protesters who think that this hasn't worked so far and they need more violent, more shocking action. And actually now the city's tycoons, this is the economic elite of Hong Kong, has chimed in as well, with Li Keqiang buying ad space in local papers to convey a message of love and dialogue between the two camps.
We'll see if that message resonates on the ground where you are. Charles, thank you very much for the update. Charles Pellegrin reporting there from Hong Kong. Now, police in Zimbabwe fired tear gas and water cannon to disperse MDC supporters. The Movement for Democratic Change planned street demonstrations to protest corruption and economic mismanagement of the government. The gathering was banned by police on Thursday, and a High Court judge threw out a petition earlier today to overturn that ban. Sudan's opposition is set to nominate the economist Abdallah Hamdok as the country's prime minister. The nomination is the first step to shaping the transitional government, which will shape the way for free and fair elections over the next 3 years. This after months of protests pushed President Omar al-Bashir out of a job back in April. Officials in Congo have confirmed 2 Ebola cases in South Kivu. The report of the outbreak is 700 kilometers south of where the virus was first detected. Ebola killed at least 1,800 people in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the past year, its second highest toll ever. Norway says it will halt its funding to Brazil to protect the Amazon rainforest. The cut in some 30 million euros of subsidies comes just days after Germany said it would do the same thing. The environmental record of Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro has come under the scanner since he took office earlier this year. Valerie de Kemp reports.
The Amazon rainforest faces an even bleaker future after donor countries said they were withdrawing funding aimed at fighting deforestation. Norway announced Thursday that it was suspending future donations of $33 million to the Amazon Fund after Brazil changed the body's governance structure.
Brazil broke the agreement with Norway and Germany since suspending the board of directors and the technical committee of the Amazon Fund. They cannot do that without Norway and Germany agreeing.
The move comes days after Germany cancelled $38 million of funding to other conservation projects due to increasing deforestation. Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro has responded angrily, saying both countries should focus on their own environmental track records.
What's with this fight? They call me Captain Chainsaw. I am the destroyer of the Amazon. They don't have the moral high ground to teach us a lesson. They extract oil in the North Pole, in the Arctic. They're taking oil from there. So these people who are waging a campaign against Brazil, they are not an example to follow.
Since Bolsonaro's election, deforestation in the Amazon has surged dramatically, rising more than 88% in June, according to Brazil's space agency. Environmentalists accuse Bolsonaro of supporting policies that have accelerated the destruction of the world's largest tropical forest, which is seen as vital in the fight against climate change.
Space tourism is one step closer to becoming a reality. Virgin Galactic has unveiled its headquarters for the taxpayer-funded project in New Mexico. Company officials say the area will help customers prepare for the journey of a lifetime. Take a look.
This is the place where tourists will begin their journey into space. Virgin Galactic has unveiled its spaceport in New Mexico, 15 years after billionaire Richard Branson first pitched the idea.
New Mexico has said yes to inward investment, yes to education, and yes to technological innovation. But perhaps most of all, New Mexico has sent a resounding yes to the future of humanity.
At $250,000 a ticket, customers can spend a few minutes in space, 6 at a time. The spaceships will be released at high altitude by a carrier plane, then travel at 3 times the speed of sound. The first of these flights are set to be announced next year.
I know I personally almost have to pinch myself that we're now working out of a real operational spaceport. We've been working for this moment for so long, and now you can walk around this beautiful facility.
Company officials say a small number of test flights are still needed. So far, about 600 people have reserved a seat.
You can follow all the stories we're tracking for you on our website. The address is france24.com. There you can see the about face of Israel now that they've granted Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib permission to visit her family over in the West Bank. This a day after her and her colleague Ilhan Omar were barred from entering Israel. That's it from me, from all of us on the team. Thank you very much for watching.